So, last week we discussed who Melchizedek is. This week we have someone new to discuss. He identified himself as the angel of the Lord, and he is the one who came and visited Hagar. Hi, I'm Heather, and we are at the feet of Jesus, and we are going through the entire Bible, one book at a time. And we have gone through Luke, we have gone through Acts, and now we are at the very beginning of the Bible in Genesis. And I am learning so much, things that I have just glossed over in the past. I'm really diving into, and I'm learning so much. So thank you for tuning in, because you are requiring me to do my homework so that I can learn this stuff, and I'm really getting into it and enjoying it. So shout out to all the ladies that I met this weekend when we did our Asmara Haven retreat online. It was about 55 women from all over the world that got together. And I got to do a little workshop there where we talked about intimacy, and it was so much fun. So awesome, ladies, and I hope some of you are tuning in. This is fun. So why don't we get into Genesis 16 and 17. Those are our chapters this week. So we're going to start at the very beginning, and I'm going to read that first verse. It says, "Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, and she had an Egyptian maidservant whose name was Hagar. So Sarai said to Abram, 'See now, the Lord has restrained me from bearing children. Please go in to my maid. Perhaps I shall obtain children by her.'" There's a couple things we need to understand right now and right here. In that day and age, not being able to have children was a horrible stigma. It was a very bad social stigma. It comes from a few verses, but one of them is Psalm 127, verses 3 and 4. So I am going to pull that up. 127, 3 and 4. Okay. "Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord. The fruit of the womb is a reward. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior, so are the children of one's youth." So I want you to put yourself in the shoes of people back then. When reading that psalm, people understood that children were, the way that they kind of often interpreted that verse is that children were a gift from God given to those who were living righteous lives. Those who God was pleased with got children. So do you understand what that's getting at? The way some people could interpret that is those people who didn't have children were not living good lives according to God. So that's probably where Sarai and Abram kind of were. It was a really sad social stigma. So then we have the whole part of Hagar going in, Sarai having her slave, her maidservant, basically having her husband go in and having sex with this woman. Oh my gosh, there's so much we can go with on that. First of all, there is this code of Hammurabi, and it was written in about 1754 BC. And on that code, it said that the child of a second wife would be given to the first wife. So that's where she was probably going with that. So that's why she thought, okay, so if we keep reading a little bit, I'm going to read a little bit more of verse 2. "So Sarai said to Abram, 'See now, the Lord has restrained me from bearing children. Please go in to my maid. Perhaps I shall obtain children by her.' And Abram heeded the voice of Sarai. Then Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, and gave her to her husband Abram to be his wife, after Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan." So that's what she was hoping. She was hoping that Hagar would have a child, and then literally Hagar, the second wife, would give that child to Sarai. So that is what happened with the code of Hammurabi. like usual, I am mutilating the name. I'm so sorry for all those people who are very learned and know how to pronounce all these names. I apologize. So anyway, there are so many problems with this scenario. What are some of the problems? First of all, it screams that Sarai was not trusting God's promises. Oh my goodness gracious. She was like, well, I obviously can't have children. And so God must have meant that I'm going to have children through Hagar. That's what God meant. Yep, that's what God meant. And I'm going to be very careful not to throw Sarai under the bus too badly, because I can probably point to a couple things today that I did where I was trying to solve a problem for one of my children, or I was trying to solve a problem that I needed to just let go and let God take care of. But I am a total problem fixer instead of letting go and letting God have his will. So that's something I worry, I fix, and I try to figure out. And that's something I deal with in my little spiritual life. So then another problem, I have 5 problems. The second problem was forcing the slave to be in a bad situation. So I will say I am admittedly looking at this way in this situation from a 2020 situation, from a point of view of a woman in the 21st century. That's how I'm looking at this. Some of these things were very culturally acceptable, and I need all of us to understand that. But I'm coming at it from my perspective. And in my perspective, Hagar didn't have much say in this situation. And so Sarai put her in a horrible situation. Another is she was handling the problem for herself. She was not, I have those as 2 things. So number 1 was not trusting God's promises. And number 3 was handling the problem herself. Those are 2 different things, and they're very similar. I think the first step to handling a problem yourself is not trusting in God's plan. And so, we need to trust God's plan so that we don't try to handle problems ourselves. Number 4, in desperation to fix the problem, she was an accomplice to abuse. And again, I'm looking at this from a 2020 standpoint, but Sarai told Abram, I want you to go in there and have a child with Hagar. Again, Hagar didn't have any choice. And I just think, yikes. We're going to get into what submission means a while from now, and we'll talk all the way through this. My 4th point is, let's see, I'm going to try to find the verse. So Abram said to Sarai, indeed, your maid, this is verse 6, your maid is in your hand. Do to her as you please. And when Sarai dealt harshly with her, she, Hagar, fled from Sarai's presence. Abram just kind of pushed the buck. He said, you know what? You created this mess. She's your issue to deal with. And you know what? We shouldn't pass the buck when we have problems, especially as a husband and wife. And so I'm going to go straight from here into what can we as a husband and wife, for those people who are married, what can we learn from this? And so first, I have 3 things. First, we need to cling together in times of stress. There are a lot of stressful situations going on here in this world right now. There are people who are losing their jobs. There are a lot of people around the world who are in full-time service to God through ministry, and they are losing, because of people losing their jobs, they're losing support. There are people who are kind of floundering as to what am I supposed to do now? There are people who are sick. There are people that are worried about being sick. There are people worried about older family members that they can't really go and help. And then in the United States, we have some types of lockdowns, but there are places in the world where they are seriously still locked down. There is a lot of stress. And when stress happens, we need to cling together as a husband and wife, not try to go off on our own and handle problems willy-nilly in desperation. We need to cling together. Number 2, we need to trust God's timing, which goes back to Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you, not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. Right here and now, I can look back at one of the most stressful times in my life and realize what amazingly awesome things came from it. Can you? Can you look back at a time and go, God had me even when I didn't realize I had there was anybody who had me. So again, number 2 is trust God's timing. Number 3 is handling problems through unrighteous means always brings problems. So Sarai, in her desperation to have children, sent Abram in to Hagar, and Hagar had a child, and then there was a lot of chaos in the camp between the two women, and because of the situation, it caused problems because Sarai and Abram did not wait for God's timing. So we've got to, especially as husbands and wives, but all of us, when there are stressful things that are happening in our lives, we need to try very hard not to try to solve the problem ourselves, but to wait on God's timing and listen. And I am preaching to myself as much as anybody because I already told you, I like to solve problems. And so I would very much be a Sarai. I would. Okay, so let's move on. Then we have the part that I teased at the beginning. So verse 9, the angel of the Lord said to her, we're talking Hagar, because at this point Hagar has escaped and the angel of the Lord finds her. Okay, let's start back at verse 8. And he said, no, I'm going to start at verse 7, sorry. Now the angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, by the spring on the way to Shur. And he said, Hagar, Sarai's maid, where have you come from? And where are you going? So Shur was on the road leading to Egypt. And remember, she's an Egyptian handservant, so she was probably trying to get home. And she said, I am fleeing from the presence of my mistress Sarai. The angel of the Lord said to her, return to your mistress and submit yourself under her hand. Then the angel of the Lord said to her, I will multiply your descendants exceedingly, so that they shall not be counted for multitude. And the angel of the Lord said to her, behold, you are with a child, and you shall bear a son. You shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has heard your affliction. He shall be a wild man. His hand shall be against every man, and every man's hand against him. And he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren. Then she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her. You are the God who sees. For she said, have I also seen him who sees me? There's several things we need to get to in this little tiny grouping of verses. First of all, and I might jump around a little bit, one of the things that I kind of was struck with was in verse 10, where it says, and the angel of the Lord said to her, I will multiply your descendants exceedingly, so that they shall not be counted for multitude. Okay, Ishmael is counted by many people as the father of, one of his descendants was the father of Islam. So they believe, people who are Islamic, they believe that Abraham is the father of their faith, and the father of their faith through Ishmael. So I really had to stay put here for a little bit and go, why would the angel of the Lord say, I will multiply your descendants exceedingly, so that they shall not be counted for multitude? I don't understand. If Islam is not truth because they don't believe in Jesus Christ as the second person of the Trinity, and they do believe in him, but they don't believe that Jesus Christ is God. So why would God, well, I give a little hint. Why would the angel of the Lord say, I will multiply your descendants exceedingly? And then I talked to a friend. I had researched this for a few hours. And then I talked to an understanding friend. His name is Alan Mask. And I said, okay, what do you think? And he said, well, I think her descendants are Gentiles. Anybody who's not Jewish is considered a Gentile. And I went, yes! Oh my goodness, I didn't think of that. So God was, well, goodness gracious, I keep blowing the next thing I'm going to talk about. But anyway, the angel of the Lord was saying, I will multiply your descendants exceedingly, speaking of non-Jewish people, speaking of Gentiles. So I thought, okay, that helps me understand this. So who is the angel of the Lord? I think I've already blown that twice. So this is my perspective. This is my belief. And there are probably people who don't believe with me. So this is one of those things that we can totally disagree with, and it's totally fine. But I will give you my perspective on why the angel of the Lord is God. And then I will go into why I do believe that this was Jesus. So why I believe he's God is it says, I will multiply your descendants. An angel can't do that. So that's where I put him in the God category. So the angel of the Lord is God. And then it goes down into verse 13, and it says, then she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her, you are the God who sees. For she said, have I also seen him who sees me? So she saw someone. And we've talked about this before when we were talking about the Abrahamic covenant. When we learn in the book of Exodus through Moses at the burning bush that you cannot look upon God's face and live. So I do believe, because the angel said he will multiply her descendants. So I do believe that puts him in the God category. But then because she says here that she saw someone, I believe you can't see God the Father and live. So it needed to be the second person of the Trinity. It needed to be God the Son. So that is my perspective. If you have a different one, go ahead and tell me. It's always fun. Okay, so then we have this stuff that the angel of the Lord did tell her. Behold, you are with a child, and I keep trying to put an there. Behold, you are with child, and you shall bear a son. You shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has heard your affliction. He shall be a wild man. Now, we think of a wild man, and some of them say like a wild donkey. We need to understand, some of the versions say wild donkey. We need to understand that wild donkeys looked a little bit more like horses that we think of now. And they were wild, and they were free, and they were on the plains, and they were just running wherever they wanted. And you need to remember who Hagar was. She was a slave. She was Sarai's slave. And he was telling her, your son is going to be free. I want you to picture like this plain in the Wild West where wild stallions are running. That's the beautiful picture that the angel of the Lord was giving Hagar. So it's not like a stubborn mule or a stubborn donkey. It's this wild, beautiful, free thing. So think about it that way. And then it says, his hand shall be against every man. Against can also mean apart from. So if we use that word, his hand shall be apart from every man, and every man's hand shall be apart from him. And he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren. So it was actually a beautiful thing. If you read that, thinking the way we think now, it can be a little bit like, wow, that's not a real compliment, God. But it really was a beautiful picture. And she was so happy with that picture that she was willing to go back and submit to Sarai. Then we have chapter 17. So we have the beginning of the covenant. Why wasn't the covenant given to Hagar? She really was the mother of Abram's first child. So why not? For that answer, we need to go to Galatians, and I have found it. So Galatians 4:22. So I am going to read it for us. For it is written that Abraham had two sons, the one by a bondwoman, the other by a free woman. So bondwoman would have been Hagar, the slave, and free woman, of course, Sarai. But he who was of the bondwoman was born according to the flesh, and he of the free woman through promise. Which things are symbolic? For these are the two covenants, the one with Mount Sinai, which gives birth to bondage, which is Hagar. And from this, Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia and corresponds to Jerusalem, which now is and is in bondage with her children. But the Jerusalem above is free, which is the mother of us all. So that would be why no covenant with Hagar. Okay, so then in verse 1, let's read verse 1, because it says something that is a little bit difficult to swallow. It says, when Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to Abram and said to him, I am Almighty God. Walk before me and be blameless. Okay, walk before me and be blameless. That sounds like a pretty difficult job, don't you think? So before me, what does that mean? Before me is paniam, and it means in the presence of. So walk in my presence and be blameless. Now, blameless we think of as perfect, but also it really can mean complete or with integrity. So walk in my presence and be complete. Isn't that what we need to do? Isn't that what we need to do? I tell you what, there are days when I wake up and I'm vigilant with having my morning quiet time and I listen to God and I sing praise music. And on those days when I do that, I am in his presence and I am blameless. I'm complete. I pray for that for you this week and for me as well. Alrighty. And then last, we're going to I want you to think, one thing I kind of tried to do some research on was why circumcision? So let me tell you the way I study these verses. I will read both chapters, just read them through, and then I'll read them through a second time, and I have a notebook and I write questions, and then the rest of my study time is spent trying to answer those questions. And so I really did some research on why circumcision? Why was circumcision, of all things, a sign of the covenant? Why couldn't it have been like a tattoo or something? I don't know. Why circumcision, and why on men, and why on that particular part of the anatomy? And I don't know. I will honestly tell you, I spent hours and hours and hours and hours looking for answers. I didn't find any. I have a couple pastors who watch this. So if you are a pastor watching this, would you comment the answer, please? I'd really like that. So Dave, put an answer down. Luke, put an answer down. I'd love it. So what I did find is a lot of people that said that circumcision was an outward sign of an inward belief, just kind of like baptism is for us. So baptism is an outward symbol. It's telling people that we believe in Jesus Christ as our Lord and Savior, and we have been created as a new being. And so we have died to sin, and we're new in this new life. So it was symbolic like that. So there we go. So then we have the name change. So why the name change? I think it meant a new beginning, a new chapter in Abram and Sarai's life. And there are so many people, and I only mentioned two here, but there are so many people that God changed their name. Two in the New Testament that I thought of was Levi to Matthew. I love that story because remember, Levi was just really despised by all the Jews. And so Jesus asks Levi to become one of the disciples. And then he changes his name, this despised guy, to Matthew. And you know what Matthew means? Gift of God. So this guy who had been despised, God renamed him Gift of God. I just love that. And then another one was Simon to Peter. And Peter, his name means rock. And that's so awesome because Peter was such a rock in the new church, especially after Jesus left earth in a mortal sense. So anyway, why Abram to Abraham? Why Sarai to Sarah? I think it is symbolic of a new change. So Abram meant exalted father. Abraham means father of a multitude. And it happened right at the instigation of the clarity of the covenant. So God had already talked way back in chapter 12 about the covenant. But here he starts getting specific. He starts saying, this is going to happen. And Sarai's going to have a child in 1 year. He starts getting real specific. And then Sarai means my princess. But Sarah means mother of princes. And so, I love that. So a name change in the Bible often occurred when God had a plan to move forward. When God was kind of going, okay, now we're going to get serious. So I think that's pretty true. We can say that that's right when God was getting serious. So I'm putting my Bible away. And I'm getting my workbook. If you have not purchased this workbook, do it. It's $9.95. If you can't afford $9.95, I will try to gift you one, especially if you live in Albuquerque. You can come by and get one, but this workbook just helps. So we are on page 38, and the main themes for the week. I really thought about this. You know what I came up with? And I'd love to hear what you think. In any of the workbook stuff, I love your input. I'd love to hear what you think. I think it was submission. You know, we had Hagar being submissive to Sarai, which was appropriate, except for when she escaped. And then the angel of the Lord said, get back there. And she did. So we have Hagar being submissive to Sarai. We have Hagar being submissive to the angel of the Lord, both of which were good. Then we have Abram being submissive to Sarai. Not so good. You know, Sarai was, we've already talked about it, was in this panic to have a child and said, Abram, just go do this. And he said, okay. And we are warned in the Garden of Eden that this is going to happen, that women are going to have a desire to rule their husbands, and husbands are going to have a desire to make their wives happy. And that is what we're seeing right here. And then finally, we have Abram being submissive to God. Awesome thing, right? So I think submission is a big theme of these two chapters. So what is the theological implication? Remember, that is what God wants us to understand. I think that, again, going with the submission thing, that submission to God-given authority, is always good. But when we ignore God-given authority, chaos happens. I think that is something that we could learn from today. Oh my goodness gracious, there is so much that we could look at here and apply to today. So the second part of page 39 is an application. And I put that Heather Fowler, I want to look at chaotic times in my life, and I want to see if there was a problem with submission in there. So I really did some thought processing on that. And I think maybe I've always had, and it's getting better, but I've always had this excessive worry about my son's health because my son has epilepsy. And when he was younger, I would do Sarai all the time. Colin, you need to do this and you need to take that and we need to get you off of this and you can't have sugar and you can't have dyes and you can't have this and let's do this medicine and let's not have you stay up until past 8:30. And I was trying to control everything. And that didn't do any good. It didn't do any good. In fact, trying to fix things in my own power made my worry worse, because I wasn't trusting God, that God was in charge of this. And there was a time when God just kind of grabbed a hold of me. And this is my thought of how it happened. It wasn't an audible voice, but it was a voice that I really heard in my heart. And it said, Heather, I could take away his epilepsy today, but I have something prepared for him. And if I take away his epilepsy today, he won't be ready for what I'm preparing him for. And I tell you what, I have the most amazing almost 23-year-old son who is growing in the faith and is growing exponentially. And I think it's because God prepared him for this. And finally, I let go and I let God take care of it. And I stopped trying to interfere. And so that's my application. I need to look for more of those times while they're happening so I can step back while they're happening and not have years and years of silliness. My verses that I got, Genesis 16:13. Then she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her, "You are the God who sees." For she said, "Have I also seen him who sees me?" We talked about that verse. I love that verse. And then Genesis 17:6. I will make you, Abraham, exceedingly fruitful, and I will make nations of you, and kings shall come from you. King David came from him. And of course, Jesus Christ came from him. So amazing. And then we have page 41. We have our study verse. So this is what I put on here. The verse is 17:5. No longer shall your name be Abram, but your name shall be Abraham, for I have made you a father of many nations. And I just really went into the newness of what a new name means and how God gives us so much newness every day. We have the newness when we become a Christian and we get baptized. And like I said earlier, we go down into the water and we die to ourselves. And then we come up a new creation. That's a big new. But then there's a new, every day is new. And all our hope is new. And all our plans, our ability to put our plans in God's hands is brand new. We have brand new opportunity every day. And that was my application. I really want to give God every moment, every new moment that I possibly can, and see him in the new moment. So, friends, what are we going to put at Jesus' feet today? I think let's put submission. And you know what? This is my question this time. And answer any questions, talk about anything you want from the video. But my question for you, if you'd like something to comment, what do you think we need to put at Jesus' feet this week? For me, I'm putting my submission at his feet because, again, I think submission is good and submission brings good stuff into my life. Peace, harmony, joy, and the other, me taking control, just brings chaos. So I'm going to put submission at his feet. Tell me what you would put at his feet this week. Friends, I care about you so much. And I am going on a 30th anniversary trip, a small trip with my husband. We were planning this big giant trip until COVID came along and the plans got much smaller. But anyway, we're going to go away this next weekend, but I'm still going to do this. So I will see you next weekend in some fun location and you'll get to see maybe something new. Not the the Albuquerque, New Mexico desert, but maybe some other wonderful place in New Mexico. So we will see you later, and friends, I love you and I am praying for you, and put your hope and your faith and your submission in God's hands because God's got this. Mwah!